Hear me in the back okay?
Right?
Yeah? You hear me okay? Do I have to shout louder or no? Awesome. Fantastic. So welcome to my talk. Let's see if Nuka can keep this volume up for 2 hours. Actually, no. So the talk is furry psychology. That's okay. That's good. We're good. Yeah, so my talk is furry psychology with an exclamation mark. I like subtitles, and so the subtitles for this talk is everything you've ever wanted to know about furries but were too afraid to ask. You'll see why in a moment. I've titled it this. I have sort of a personal story for why, and it's kind of personal. But I'll start off by saying, why am I here? I'll give in this case I'll talk about my furry credentials. I'll talk about my research credentials later, but I think it's more important for me to establish my furry credentials. Why I'm a furry speaking to you as a furry today. I am a furry because of Pokemon. I was 13 years old, and I was walking through the living room, and my little brother and sister were watching Pokemon. And I said, "That's stupid. You're immature." And as I was walking out of the room, Mewtwo was on the screen, and I said, "Holy crap, that's cool. What is that?" And they said, "It's a Pokemon." I said, "Okay, smart with me. What is that?" I said, "It's Mewtwo." Like, that's lame. And then I went to the internet, and I started looking at pictures of Mewtwo and artists who draw Mewtwo, and finding Mewtwo chat rooms, and eventually I found webcomics who portrayed Mewtwo-type characters. And this one right here, this particular character's name is Nuka, from a webcomic that I used to read. And I wanted to be just like Nuka. Nuka was my hero. Going through junior high and eventually high school, I wanted to be like Nuka, and I actually portrayed myself as Nuka in chat rooms that were, I didn't know it at the time, but they were furry chat rooms. They were just chat rooms where people would take on anthropomorphic characters, and I'd never heard the term furry, but for years I spent most of my free time in high school in these kinds of chat rooms. Then I got to university, and in second year university I had a good friend of mine look at the backdrop, the desktop that you saw a couple minutes ago, and he said, "Oh, you're a furry." And I said, "What the hell's a furry?" And he said, "Oh, it's people who like that kind of art, people who are fans of that stuff." And I said, "Oh, I'd never heard of this term before." And I said, "Yeah, so, I lived in Edmonton at the time," and he said, "There's a group, the Alberta Furries, and there's a whole bunch of us here, and you should come out and meet them and see other furries, people with the same interests as you." And I was a little skeptical because this was this little hobby that I kind of kept to myself and didn't tell anyone about, and so I was a little nervous, but what the hell, I don't ever leave my house ever, so let's try it. And it was great. I met a whole bunch of people. I think it was the first meet was like 30 or 40 furries were there. I'm like, this is awesome. These are people who are just like me. And I saw fursuits for the first time, and I was running around. I had questions. I was a science major at the time, and so I was running around saying, what is that species, and what's the most popular species, and why is everyone here so young, and where are the females, and no one really had a good answer. I had all these questions about what is the state of the fandom, and no one had any answers that no one had done the research, and so that kind of stuck with me all through undergrad, and eventually I got to grad school. And in grad school, I have to come up with sort of a dissertation project, and I was kind of struggling for one, and I said, well, let's see what my interests are, and I had just become a furry, and I said, well, I kind of like this sort of thing. Maybe I can find a way to convince the school that it's actual science. So one person laughs, thank you. And so I started getting into trying to find a way to turn this into research, and eventually I met with my colleague, Dr. Kathy Gerbasi, and she was, at the time, the only psychologist studying furries in any kind of scientific way. I joined her at Anthrocon a few years ago, I think 3 years ago now, to do a study with her at Anthrocon, and ever since then I've been collaborating with her. A year later, Dr. Stephen Rayson at Texas A&M University joined our team, and we went to Furry Fiesta for the first time. About a year ago, Dr. Sharon Roberts, I proctored an exam for her, for one of her exams, and she became really excited when she saw that I was in fact a furry, and she tells the story way better than I ever could. But the important thing is it was a serendipitous finding, and eventually Dr. Sharon Roberts became sort of my supervisor on this furry research at the University of Waterloo, and then there's me. This is for the record, all my students in all my undergrad classes stuff, this is the picture that, here's your TA, and this is the one I use. To make sure they take me seriously, between this and teaching classes in fursuits and stuff, I think they get the message that I'm a serious scientist. So the four of us combined here make up the International Anthropomorphic Research Project. The reason it's such a long and complicated sounding title is because this helps us get funding. We sound serious and official this way, so we purposely picked a nice, fancy sounding title. So we are the International Anthropomorphic Research Project, and we are here at Oklacon. I'm here to talk to you about some of our research today. So the sort of plan for today is to first tell you sort of a less sarcastic way what we're doing here, the more sciencey part of it.
I know that reference.
Yes, thank you. The MASH reference.
Yes.
Yep. I'll be talking about what furry research is and what furry research isn't, because I think a lot of people have sort of misconceptions about what it is we actually do as scientists. The meat and potatoes of this talk will be talking about the research. What have we found so far? We've been doing this research now for 3, 4, 5 years. It's time to sort of, okay, well, have you been wasting your time, or have we actually come up with something? After that, we're doing a Q&A, sort of an Ask a Furry Research or anything. At this point, I can talk about data that I haven't presented here. We like taking suggestions for questions. Many of the questions that we asked on surveys in the past have been because of talks like these and furries who give us really good research ideas. So I'd be happy to take some of those ideas. I carry around a notepad at every con I go to and usually fill it with questions from furries. So your input is very useful. And finally, if you have time or if people care, funny research stories. You'd be surprised how much being a professional furry and talking to ethics boards and working with real psychologists can actually lead to humorous situations when this is what you study. So to start off, what is the IARP? What is our research? What do we do? We are the scientific study of furries. So specifically, we're approaching it from a psychological perspective, from a sociological perspective, through the use of demographics, trying to get a snapshot of what the furry fandom is, and sort of the underlying psychological and sociological forces that contribute to what it is today. We're interested, our goal is to conduct and disperse furry research. We're interested in both of those, and that's why I'm here talking to you today. Because in addition to sort of collecting research at furry conventions and through the use of online surveys, we also disperse this information either through at conventions, through talks like these, through our website. We have a research website. Most of you probably have the cards that we've been throwing at you all convention by now. And also through the media. So we have spoken to the media on a number of occasions. So I've been on the National Geographic Taboo episode, which didn't go as well as I planned, but it was something. I've done radio programs. Dr. Gabasi's done a number of radio programs, newspaper review or interviews, and we also do academic publishing as well. So we publish our research. We've published so far in one peer-reviewed journal. We've got 2 different ones currently under review. The British Journal of Social Psychology recently turned us down, and their loss. They're British, so I don't care. It's going to be on YouTube, so I shouldn't say that, actually. We'll write a better story for them. They'll buy it. And also psychology conferences. So we've actually presented this data before at psychology conferences. So we're interested in both the academic and the, contributing to the academic community, but also giving back to the furry community. It's important to know what this research is and what it is not. So what this research is, we're using empirically validated methods and measures. We're actually using psychological scales. We're using scales that have been developed by psychologists in the past. Some of them we create ourselves, but we validate them, we test them, we pick up the bad questions, we figure out where they go wrong, we try and improve upon them. They're conducted under guidance from an ethical review board. So all of our research goes through an ethics board. It goes through, if you come to my talk tomorrow, you'll see why we go through an ethics board, because my talk tomorrow is when science goes wrong. We try not to have science go wrong. It's all conducted within a psychological framework. So we use psychological theories, we use psychological models. This is one example of one such model from one of our papers. So we have hypotheses that we test. It's done for the purpose of knowledge acquisition and distribution. So our goal here isn't to try and prove a point. Our goal is to try and acquire knowledge, to learn something new, and to distribute it to the world around us. And it's value neutral and non-judgmental. So in other words, I'm testing hypotheses. I had to get that in there. What we are not sensationalism. We do not exist to tell a really cool story. We don't exist to try and make furries into something that it may not be. We're not anecdote collection. So we're not here to say, well, Phil from Idaho said this, and Bob from Toronto said this about furries. We're collecting in a very systematic way, and try and measure trends, to measure predictable effects in the fandom and in people's engagement in the fandom. We try not to be misleading or pressuring, so ethics ensures that when we're doing this research, we're not lying to participants about what we're doing. We're not cornering furries into a corner and trying to force them to tell us all the nitty-gritty, dirty, dark stuff. That's not what we're here for. We're not exclusionary. We try our best to get out to as many furries as possible. We use we come out to cons like this all over North America. We do online surveys that have, to date, gotten furries from 69 different countries. We try and get as many furries as possible in on this so we can have the best picture of the fandom as it exists today. We are not opinion or agenda pushing. We don't exist to tell furries what they ought to be. We don't exist to try and dictate what the fandom, the direction the fandom should go in. We're merely reporters of what exists, for good or for bad. That's the goal of this research. So on to the meat and potatoes of this talk, the data. In talking about the data today, it's important to note that this data doesn't all come from one study. So in fact, we've been doing this for a few years now. And as you can see, the data comes from Anthropomorphic, Furry Fiesta, Anthropomorphic online control groups. In total, we have about 10,000 participants, about 8,000 of which are furry, and about 1,500 of which or so are non-furry. So at this point, we have a pretty good picture of at least some of the things that we're claiming to talk about. So if a person says, well, I know at least 2 or 3 furries who aren't like that, we've asked 10,000 of them so far. So we're pretty confident in at least some of the things that we're talking about today. In terms of the data that we're actually presenting, this is the sort of order that we'll be talking about them in. So we'll start off with some demographics, sort of getting a snapshot of what they're about. Moving on to furry-specific statistics, so statistics that maybe furries care about more, or things that furries could understand. Getting to furry subgroups. So this is a lot of the new stuff. If you've seen my talks in the past, this will be where a lot of the new stuff is in, looking specifically at Theians and looking at Bronies as a subculture. The Bronies one is some of my favorite data. Looking at, it's great because you get the furries and the Bronies start arguing with each other in the room, and it's fantastic. Furry culture, what does it mean to be furry? What does it mean to engage in the furry fandom? Species and personas, because that seems to be one that furries are really interested in. That's one we get the most requests to talk about. Relationships and sexuality. And finally, furry psychology. So what do psychologists have to say about furries? So what are we as psychologists interested in that maybe furries aren't that interested in, but still interesting, I suppose. Demographics. I'm going to take a quick drink of water. That would be a good time to admire my brilliant image. Thank you. That'll play great on YouTube. Starting with age. So what we've got here, when you look at these figures, the bar on the bottom is going to show the range. So based on all these different studies, this is sort of the range of our findings for each of these different findings. So, for example, age of furries, we find that there are differences on average between con-going furries and online furries. In general, we find that the furries who attend cons tend to be about a year or 2 older than the furries who are online. This kind of makes sense because usually a con involves some form of travel. Travel is kind of expensive, and typically the ones who can afford travel tend to be the ones who have a better career. The ones who have a better career tend to be a little more mature. Not surprising. Non-furry, this is our non-furry control groups, the average age of them. So in general, the sort of conclusion that I want to draw from age is that furries are a relatively young group. Very much so, you can see that 90% of the fandom is 30 years old or younger. So it's not to say that there aren't older furries in the fandom, there aren't gray muzzles out there, there aren't furries who are well into their 40s and 50s, but the vast majority of the fandom is younger. It's a younger person's fandom. Now, whether or not this is due to the fact that furry is relatively young and it's only recently that it's gotten popular, or due to the fact that when you turn 30, 35, you start to fall out of the fandom, life happens. We can't be sure of which of these two it is. We have hypotheses on one way or another. We can tell you about them later. Ultimately, it rests on different studies from the ones we've done so far to be able to draw conclusions about it so far. Longitudinal studies, which we're hoping to implement starting next year. In terms of where our samples come from, the vast majority of them come from the United States. That's mostly a product of the fact that we are English-speaking. We don't speak Japanese, we don't speak a lot of other languages, and as a result, we're kind of confined to anyone who can speak English. So about 2/3 of our sample is referring to American furries. About 10% of our sample referred to Canadian furries, and that's mostly a product of the fact that I'm Canadian and I have contacts with a number of the Canadian furry groups, so I can draw upon a larger furry sample in Canada. About 15% of our sample comes from parts of Europe, specifically northwestern Europe. But that said, like I said, we have 68, 69 different countries now who've taken our survey, and so we have a good representation of at least most of the world. We have furries from from 6 different continents. No one from Antarctica yet, unfortunately. I'm still waiting for a penguin persona from Antarctica. In terms of recruitment, online, so a lot of recruitment comes from conventions like this one, or Anthropomorphic, or Furry Fiesta. When we do online recruitment, we typically draw from Fur Affinity. That seems to be where we get a lot of our furries from. It's one of the most popular websites out there for furries. That said, we get a lot of recruitment from other places. WikiFur, from friends referring to them, word of mouth, advertising. Everything from 4chan has stumbled upon our survey in the past, Flayra, Facebook, other internet. But internet seems to be the place where we recruit the most of these furries from. In terms of ethnicity, the vast majority of furries tend to be white, although that said, about 20% of furries tend to belong to some member of an ethnic minority. Biological sex, this will perhaps not surprise anyone in this room, because looking in the room I can see it right now. Between 79 and 85% of the con-going furry fandom is male. This has been pretty consistent across our samples, as you can see. It tends to fluctuate between 79 and 85%. We have a number of hypotheses for these. We started testing some of these hypotheses. I'd be happy to talk about some of them later. The most dominant one, the one that I'm most interested in, is the idea of norms. So the idea that the furry fandom has a history coming out of the science fiction fandom, which is primarily male. And as a result, females looking at the fandom tend to see it as this sort of boys' club, and unless you sort of have a way to get your foot in the door, it may not be a very inviting place. A lot of females, I'm hypothesizing, get into the fandom either because they have a foot in the door, so they're an artist, or they sort of have something that contributes to the fandom in that sense, in terms of content, or they have a boyfriend or a spouse or a significant other who also happens to be in the fandom who can sort of get their foot in the door. This isn't every female, of course, to be sure, but I'm thinking this may be a trend, and we'd like to test this in the future, test this hypothesis. I'm definitely open to hearing other hypotheses, though, if people have them. I'll also mention at this point, by the way, feel free to raise your hand, interrupt as I'm speaking. I don't feel obligated to save your questions till the end. So, I'm also kind of blind, so wave your hand to get my attention if I'm ignoring you. So, unless I'm ignoring you for other reasons. That was a joke. I like this audience. Gender bending. So the idea of whether or not your persona and your persona's gender differs from your own gender. What we find is that as you go on this x-axis here, as you go further away from one, it's more likely that your persona is a different gender than your own. And what we find is that for about 40% of furries, their persona gender is at least a little bit from their own gender. So whether it's I'm a little more feminine in my persona than I otherwise would be, or I'm always a completely different gender altogether, going straight from complete alpha male to complete female. About 40% of furries say they're somewhere in that range of I bend my gender a little bit when I'm in my persona. We find that females actually do this more than males. Not a lot, but enough to be statistically significant. So females are more likely to use their persona as a way of being a part of another gender, being more masculine than males using their persona to be a little more feminine. I think I'm accidentally repeating myself with this, so move on. Spirituality. Are furries religious? I've heard things on both sides. A lot of the stereotype tends to be that, oh, most furries are atheists, and oh, there are no religious furries. That's not true at all. So a few years ago at Anthropomorphic, when we first asked this question, we found that about 25% of the furry fandom is atheist, about 25% is agnostic, so meaning about half of furries are atheist or agnostic. About 25% are Christian, and 25% are other, which includes pagan, other major religions, or some variety of something. If you give furries an open-ended answer, you'll get some crazy responses. We refined this a little more last year, and we can break it up a little more specifically. Interestingly, we found that atheists comprise about 44% of the furry fandom when prodded and sort of forced into answering it. 45% said atheist, and about 10% said agnostic. We have about 23% are Christian again, so we're still finding about 50% are atheist or agnostic, about 25% are Christian again. And then in breaking down the last 25%, we're a little more precise. We can say that 13% are other. We got some Buddhists, some Wicca, pagans, Jewish, Satanic, sort of a mixed bag of things. But it's incorrect to say that the furry fandom is entirely atheistic or mostly predominantly atheistic, because about 50% of the fandom has some sort of spiritual belief. So, oh, sorry, I thought it was a hand. In terms of, I like this picture way too much. I use it in as many talks as I can, even when it's not related. So we were asked a lot about, in trying to explain furries and explain what a furry is, people have asked us to explain, what about furries sort of growing up explains why they became furry. And so one person has suggested, well, maybe it's the fact that do furries come from broken homes? And we find that about 1/3 of furries came from families who had divorced. This did not differ statistically significantly from the general population. So it doesn't seem to be the case that something that explains furries becoming furries is the fact that their parents were divorced. That doesn't seem to explain it. Interestingly, looking at the family demographics, we find that about 15% of furries are only children. But of those who had at least one sibling, we found that almost 50% of furries were the oldest. And only 34% of them were actually the youngest, when it was possible to be so. So if you're a single child, you can't be the oldest or the youngest. So it's interesting that this distribution seems to be the case that if you're a furry, you're more likely to be an oldest child than you are to be a younger child. We have no idea why that is. We're thinking about it, we're coming up with hypotheses. Nothing jumps out at us, but we'd be happy to talk about it afterwards. In terms of number of siblings, most furries have between 1 and 2 siblings. This is sort of on par with the general American population. About 4% of furries have a kid. It's a random little fact, but I don't really have a hypothesis or anything based on that. 4% of furries have a kid.
Probably 8.
8, yeah. I'm thinking that's probably due to the fact that the furry fandom is relatively young. We didn't really have a hypothesis about that, like what we thought the number should be or ought to be. It was just we were asking family demographics, and someone had asked, "Hey, how many furries have kids?" So 4%. The more you know. In terms of education, we find that most furries have at least some college or university education. This tends to be trending and relatively on par with the general American population. I believe the trend is that furries have slightly more education, but it's not a huge, significant amount. Other demographics that come up, furries, so in terms of comparing con-going furries to the general American population, we found that some of the differences that come up are that in terms of parental education, furries had slightly more parental education than non-furries did. In terms of political orientation, furries are more likely to be liberal. In terms of global citizenship, which is the notion that, I should back up a little bit. Global citizenship is the idea of who you sort of include as being in the same group as you, your in-group. So if I belong to a class of psychology students, I can say, oh, this classroom is sort of my in-group, it's my peers. And global citizenship is this idea that the world, everyone in the world, humanity, is part of my in-group. And it predicts a number of psychologically interesting things, such as whether or not you're more empathic towards people, whether or not you dehumanize people. And we find that furries are more likely to be higher in global citizenship, to consider those around them to be part of sort of a global family, or group at the very least. In terms of annual income, furries didn't differ significantly from the general population. In terms of religiosity and spirituality, they didn't differ either. So furries aren't really more religious or spiritual than the rest of the population. Furry-specific statistics, so moving out of demographics. I like funny pictures. There's no excuse. Let me take a drink, actually. Why you admire this table of science? All right. So looking at the average furry has been a furry for between 6.5 to 8.5 years. The average furry said that they first sort of felt furry around the age of 16, 17 years old. The average furry joined up with the furry community or became involved in the furry community between the age of 17 and 19 years old. What you'll notice is there's a bit of a difference here. Between the average furry, about a year to 3 years of time went by between the time they started feeling kind of furry and the time they actually met like-minded others and started considering them a part of a community of like-minded others. And so I'm interested in this period of time and wondering whether or not sort of wondering what happens to furries in this period of time. You know, what happens when you feel that you're kind of different from the world around you, but you haven't kind of found that community of like-minded others yet. And a lot of furries, I imagine, can probably sympathize with this experience of, you know, I feel kind of different, but I'm not sure, you know, are there others like me? Question?
So does that mean that gray muzzles are generally joining when they're already older?
So the question was, does this mean that gray muzzles are generally joining when they're older? That's possible, and I have met, you know, anecdotally speaking, I have met a few gray muzzles who have gotten into the fandom at the age of 35, 40, 45, 50. I suspect that they got into it when they were younger, just because it tends to be a more younger hobby or something that, you know, like science fiction tends to be hobbies that younger people tend to have. That would just be, I mean, that it would, it wouldn't skew the average so much, or it would just be sort of a deviant point in terms of this. I mean, there's enough data to sort of, these are the averages, and they'd be more of a deviant point in that sense. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but.
I got a take on that.
Pardon me?
I got a take on that.
Sure.
It could just be access. The internet makes it easier to find, and that's a recent advancement.
Exactly.
Some of these people, when they were in their teens or they were younger, didn't have access to it, and they had to find other people, which could be difficult.
There have been only cons.
Yeah.
Some of them, they don't.
Yeah, exactly. Way back in the way back in the 80s and the 90s, like early 90s, a lot of the furry fandom was not online. It was, you know, you either subscribed to message boards even. You either went to cons or you know mailing, or you have little meetups of people in your area. But it was really hard to sort of meet others, meet like-minded others, with the advent of the internet. And this might explain as well why there's this sort of proliferation of a lot of younger furries these days. With the internet, it was much easier to discover like-minded others. One of the facts that we sort of suggest, or we would kind of come up with, is an estimate that 1 in 2,500 to 1 in 5,000 people is a furry. So if you live in a town of about 5,000 people, chances are you're probably the only one. You know, statistically, 1, maybe 2 people in that town are furry. Unless you bump into them on the street, it's
So
pretty
then
hard
a town of
to.
130.
Yeah. And it's at 130, you're probably not a furry. No, but the idea is that the advent of the internet makes it a lot easier for these people to bump into each other and to find each other. So that's a very good point. Thank you. So in terms of defining what furry is, this has sort of been a thorn in our side from the very beginning. Because when you ask furries what a furry is, you get as many definitions of furry as there are furries.
I know that.
Yeah. So we try to, we have a very simple definition of what furry is for our research. We say, if you consider yourself a furry, you're a furry. Simple enough. But in trying to pick apart sort of what furry means to people, we asked it in sort of 3 different ways. We asked, do you identify, to what extent do you identify as a furry? To what extent do you identify with the furry community? And to what extent do you identify with your persona species? And if you look at the blue and green bars, they tend to be the same sort of trend. We tend to find that most furries will say that, yeah, I strongly identify as a furry, and I tend to strongly identify with my persona species. But there's sort of a little bump right here. And you see that most furries will say, yeah, I identify with other furs to some extent. But, you know, not all furs, and you may be able to imagine why. You can think of examples of furs you may not want to identify with. Some people can. So that may be why. So it seems to be that what furry is to you may be tied more closely to, you know, a feeling inside of you, an identity thing, or the extent to which you identify and sort of relate to a specific species. Perhaps not as strongly you define furry by belonging necessarily to the furry community. So your furry identity can exist independent of the furry community. This one comes up a lot, or at least I'm sensitive to it, because the National Geographic episode screwed it up. They defined furries, or they kind of screwed up the stat, and they said that furries were people who thought that they were animals. And that's not exactly true. That's not a true statement, because if you look at the numbers here, so the very, very bottom bar is the general American population. The bar above that, or the row above that, is what furries said across all of our studies. We find when we ask people, do you consider yourself to be, less than 100% human? We find that between 1/4 and 1/2 of furries say, yeah, I consider myself not entirely human. When we ask them, do you consider yourself more than 100% human? You're human plus something else. Again, about a third of them said, yeah, I consider myself human, and something thrown into the mix for fun. Of those who said that they don't feel 100% human, not that many of them, only about 8 to 15% of them on average said that it was a physical difference. I feel physically not entirely human. Much more of them said that it was a spiritual or mental thing. Psychologically, I don't feel like I'm totally human, or spiritually, I'm not completely human. When we asked people, furries and non-furries, would you be completely inhuman, completely not human if you could? Only about 10% of the general population said, yeah, I'd be an animal all the time if I could. But a third to half of furries said, yeah, if I could do that, I would totally do that. And in terms of would you be this all the time, about a third of furries said, yeah, I'd be an animal all the time if I could. So what this suggests is that, even though a lot of furries tend to endorse this idea of, yeah, it'd be kind of cool to be an animal, or sometimes I feel like I'm not entirely human, it'd be incorrect to say that furry is defined as people who think they're animals or want to be animals. I mean, at its highest value here, the ones who would be 0% human if they could, only about half of them would. So that's not a correct diagnostic statement about what a furry is.
Question on that.
Pardon me?
Question on that.
Sure.
Do you count as being an animal the anthroform or four-leggers?
Say again? Do they count?
For the people of 0%, does that count a four-legger animal or anthros?
I think we left it up to them to decide what it meant to be not entirely human. So whatever, if you considered an anthro to be not entirely human, that was up to them. So, because we try to avoid imposing a definition whenever possible. Statistics on fursuits. This is another one that the media commonly gets incorrect. A lot of times, and the National Geographic episode did it as well, they said, here are some furries, and every one of us had a fursuit. Only about 13% of furries actually own a full fursuit, with about 25% more owning parts of a fursuit, a tail, or the head, or paws, or some combination thereof. So it's actually incorrect to say that furries are people with fursuits, or even to say that furries are people with tails and ears, because only between an eighth and a third of the furry population actually does this. About 10 to 15% of people say that they've never planned to own it either. So it's not the case that, all furries wish they could have fursuits, but only some of them can afford it. A decent number of the furries actually have no desire to own one. That's just not how they express their furry identity. It's like looking at a sports fan, and some people own the jersey, some people think it'd be cool to own a jersey, some people just want to watch the game and have no desire in owning a jersey. And about 70% of furries say they own some form of furry paraphernalia, be it a collar, a furry t-shirt, something like that, something which could potentially identify them as a furry to person watching. So furries like swag. In terms of self-disclosure, we find that most furries, so the blue bar here talks about how much furries disclose to friends, and we find that most furries say that, yeah, I tell most of my friends, or at least some of my friends know that I'm a furry. But looking at the red bar and the green bar, we find furries are much less likely to tell their family or their day-to-day co-workers or people from their church group that they're a furry. So this tends to be something that furries will tell their friends, possibly because a lot of their friends may be furry, but a lot of furries really don't tell their parents about it, or kind of keep that sort of thing from their parents. Attitudes towards animals. So this is a relatively new one here. So people suggested, are furries animal rights activists? Are they people who are, they're especially sensitive towards animals? 3% of furries are currently vegetarian, and about 14% say that they were vegetarian at one time. This did not differ statistically from the American population. We found that 83% of furries say that they support animal rights. We left that up to them to decide what supporting animal rights meant. And 7% of themselves consider themselves animal rights activists, again letting them decide what that meant. Therians were actually more likely, statistically more likely. So if you were Therian, you were more likely to say that you supported animal rights, and you were more likely to say that you consider yourself to be an activist. You were almost 3 times more likely. I'll mention what Therians are in a second, but for Therians in the room, you may be nodding your head. Maybe this makes some sense to you. And in terms of the specific issues that furries feel particularly sensitive about when it comes to animal rights, furries are much more likely to feel sensitive about displacing animals for the use of land, using animals in laboratory research, unnecessary pain and suffering being inflicted on animals, the use of fur in clothing. This one is particularly poignant because a lot of people have asked me, like non-furries ask me, oh, do they use real fur in the fursuits? And I'm seeing a lot of head shaking going on here. Most furries will vehemently disagree with the notion of using real fur in a fursuit. And cosmetics testing, many furries feel strongly about the idea of using animals for the testing of cosmetics. Pet and pet ownership. But one of the only things that you can say applies to nearly all furries is that almost all furries have owned a pet at one point. And about 2/3 of furries own a pet currently.
Does that differ statistically from?
I couldn't find numbers on pet ownership in the general population. When we asked this question, we didn't have a good control group at the time, so I don't actually know what the general population statistics are on that. I guess I could try checking the SPCA or something like that, but I'm not sure what the numbers are, so I don't have a way of comparing it, unfortunately.
Sounds like something to look into.
Yeah.
With that question, you might find, everybody's had some sort of pet at some time in their life.
Yeah. I don't suspect that this would be much, much higher than the general population. Perhaps a little bit. 98% is a pretty high number. That's nearly universal. And perhaps not surprisingly, dogs and cats are the most popular species owned by furries. This is probably pretty consistent with the general population. Furries and furry subcultures. So we asked people here, what do you think of these different potential subcultures within the furry fandom? And so as you can see on the left side here, artists, writers, musicians, suitors tend to be rated pretty positively. You get around to gamers. Gamers tend to be rated pretty positively in the fandom. Theians and otherkin tend to think pretty highly of Theians and otherkin. Furries, not so much. Fetishists are kind of werewolves, thought kind of highly about. Vampires probably has something to do with Twilight. I think this came out after Twilight, so. Steampunk, military furs, these other subcultures tend to be at least somewhat popular, decently supported by the furry fandom at large. Nazi furs, perhaps unsurprisingly, not so well liked among the fandom. Baby furs are an interesting one. I mentioned baby furs if only because I sat through a number of baby fur panels and really tried to understand this phenomenon, because I guess it resonates with me because, not because I'm a baby fur, but because of the things that a lot of baby furs say. So a lot of baby furs feel quite stigmatized by the rest of the fandom. They feel like the fandom kind of picks on us. The fandom says all these negative things about us, and there are a lot of stereotypes that exist about baby furs, including things like association with scat and diapers, or associations with things like pedophilia. And if you go to baby fur panels, if you talk to baby furs, the vast majority of them vehemently say that's not what it's about at all. And they say things like, these are things that ignorant people say who don't understand us, who don't take the time to know us. Do these arguments, and please sound familiar to any of you? The kinds of things that we say about ignorant media, who says ignorant people say these things about us, people who don't take the time to know us. This is my only little soapbox here, but I will say that we as a fandom who define ourselves as being open, as being accepting, we really ought to recognize when that if this is something that we really claim to be an important part of our fandom, we should really sort of try and walk the walk and recognize when we're doing this to our own fandom. And if we are going to be open and accepting, and we decry the media who isn't open and accepting, we should make sure that we do this within our own fandom as well. In terms of subgroups, Theians. So for a couple of years now, we've been interested in this group called Theians, specifically trying to nail down a definition of what a Theian is. Are there any Theians in the room? Self-identified Theians in the room? No? Oh, one, sort of, kind of?
Yeah, it's the
Oh, one. Oh, hello there. Howdy. Excellent. Good, so you guys can tell me if I'm completely off my rocker here. Because I'm not a Theian. I'm only trying to speak about Theians based on the data we've had. We're trying to nail down a definition of Theian based on what we've studied. And the best definition we can come up with so far, and again, feel free to jump in if I'm way off here, is Theians are a group of people who identify with animals. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean physically. Some of them physically, they feel physically like, I don't just like this species, but I am a member of this species. Either physically or psychologically, I have I think like this animal, or spiritually, I have the spirit of this animal, and I'm kind of trapped in a human body. Is that sort of the ballpark, kind of?
yeah.
Yeah?
I like that definition.
Okay. Yeah, so the idea is, like, whereas furries may say something like, oh, I really like this species, I really like wolves, the Theian would say, well, I don't just like wolves, but I'm actually, you know, I get wolves. I sort of think like a wolf, I feel like a wolf, I'm wolfish, I actually am a wolf in some ways. And again, we're still putting together this definition, we're still changing it sort of based on the data we come up with. But the data that we're basing this on, well, first of all, how prevalent are these folks in the fandom? We find that between 6 and 20%, depending on where you're getting your sample from, of furries self-identify as Therians. And we find that most Therians also identify as furries. So they say, I'm a Therian and I'm also a furry. Otherkin, this is a lot tougher to nail down. If I'm understanding it correctly, and if there's any otherkin in here, you can feel free to yell at me. As best I can piece it together, otherkin are Therians who identify with mythical creatures, or creatures, you know, so instead of wolves and dogs and big cats, it's dragons or creatures that don't physically exist.
Yeah.
Pretty close? All right. So I'm not completely off my rocker there. And we find that again, 6 to 15% of furries, of people who took our sample took our survey identify as otherkin, and most otherkin also tend to identify as furries. There's a bit of overlap between Therians and otherkin, as you can see here, between 25 and 40% of Therians also identify as otherkin.
Actually, a fair bit of non-furry otherkin that your sample data might not be getting.
Because and I totally recognize that as a possibility, and that's one place we may want to extend this data, is to try and get at, you know, otherkin websites or Therian websites that may not have any association
There's
with furries.
plenty of fae and elves, actually. They seem to be the majority.
Oh, I didn't actually know that, so I will have to make a note of that. Thank you. I've learned something today. This is science.
We have new data.
And trying to nail down a definition of what a Therian is, this is one of the most important figures. It's kind of small. So those blue bars are furries and red bars are Therians. And across the bottom here, we're seeing the age in which you came to feel like, you know, you were a fan of this, or that you came to feel this association or this affiliation for the species. And what you find way over here on the left, at less than 6 years old, Therians were much more likely to say that, from birth, or from as young as I can remember, this was something I felt. Furries were much more likely to say it was something that, in my teens or my early 20s I started to feel this. For Therians, they're much more likely to say, I was born like this. This is something that I always was like this, or very young I started to feel like this. So the Therians are kind of nodding their head a little bit. Maybe this is sort of resonating with you a bit. Yes? No? Okay. Not to put you guys on the spot or anything. Therians are much more likely than furries to actually identify with being a furry. So many more Therians will say this is, furry is something I feel very strongly about. They're much more likely to identify with other furries in the community, so they're much more likely to be tied to furries and have more furries in their social circle. Much more likely to identify with their furry species, to say, I really feel this close connection to my persona species. Pardon me?
I said that stands to
It's that, yeah, it kind of makes sense. If this didn't show up this way, I'd be concerned about our definition. And even in terms of the importance of furry in defining me, for them they say that furry is something much more fundamental to who I am as a person than perhaps the average furry who says, well, this is something I enjoy, but it may not define who I am as a person. Therians are much more likely to say, this is who I am as a person. Much more likely to say, I heard one Therian put it, furry is something I am, not something I do. Therians were a little more likely than furries to say that they didn't have a choice over this, that they didn't, that this wasn't something they chose, but something that they just kind of were born with. They identified more with their species. They feel their species is the deeper part of them, and they said they have less choice over what species they ended up with. Therians were almost 3 times as likely to consider themselves less than 100% humans than were furries, and they were twice as likely to say that this was a physical difference, not a psychological difference. That said, most Therians will say that that feeling less than human is due to feeling mentally less than 100% human or spiritually less than 100% human. They were much more likely to say that they would be completely inhuman if they could, and a little bit more likely to say that what they felt was this feeling of being human plus something else mixed in. Yeah, and then they were more likely to agree with this idea that part of me is best expressed by something non-human. So based on this data, this is where we're coming up with the definition of what a furry, or what a furry and what a Therian is, and being able to sort of empirically ground some of our definitions. Are there actual differences between furries and Therians? Hi, Lenny.
Hi.
Everyone wave to them.
Just checking on you guys, that's all. Been
Three.
passed out yet?
Pardon?
The Kool-Aid been passed out yet?
Sorry.
For those on YouTube, he just asked if the Kool-Aid's been passed out yet. When you read about this in the newspaper, you'll know why. I don't feel good about that one.
Stop trying to keep up with the Joneses.
Oh, that's bad, and you should feel bad. All right. Therians are a little more likely than furries are to be female. This is statistically significant. Transgendered, interestingly enough, you're about 3 times more likely to be transgendered if you are Therian. Part of this may be, and this is...
Is that your spell check saying this is not a word, or something with that underline, or was that...
Yes. I thought I'd fix that.
Emphasis.
Yeah, I've fought with my spell check. I should have just added it to the dictionary at this point. I've added, because of my research in furries...
that furry isn't...
No, I've added that to spell check a long time ago. So I've added so many words to my spell check because of furries. So the transgender thing, you're about 3 times more likely to be transgendered if you are a Therian. I'm thinking this, my hypothesis has to do with the fact that, in the same way that Therians can understand this notion of species being sort of a fluid construct, it may be a little more easy to also identify gender and sex as a fluid construct as well. So they may be more open to the idea of being trapped in the wrong gender or feeling that you're not in the right body. It's a hypothesis. It's an empirical question. We have to test it with questions, and we hope to in the future. Looking at differences between Therians and furries. So they differ in terms of these attitudes towards animals and their feelings towards, to identify as an animal. With that said, there aren't a lot of differences in terms of other psychological factors. So for example, they don't engage in fantasy any more than each other. There's no differences in self-esteem, in terms of physical health. They are just as happy in their relationships, just as healthy psychologically, and they have just as well established a sense of who they are as a person. Yes. Here we go. Pegasus sister, I have Pegasus sister here because I had a female brony get angry at me at a con one time for saying, I said brony, but what about Pegasus sisters? And I said, oh, what the hell is a Pegasus sister? I've learned since what a Pegasus sister is. I've also learned that a lot of female bronies say that's really stupid. I'm putting it on there to be inclusive. So, what have we learned about bronies? I'm going to ask you right now, raise of hands, how many bronies are in our fandom? If you're going to give a percentage, what percentage of our fandom considers himself a brony? In the back there. 30 to 40%? Other guesses?
I'd say quarter.
Quarter?
Yeah.
About a quarter? How many of you have read our research online? Yeah, some of you.
I saw something on Clara.
17.5%. Statistically, about 1/4 of you in this room are bronies. Raise your hand if you consider yourself to be a brony. Pretty good. No, that's not bad. It's not bad. Between a quarter and a third. So at Anthropomorphic, we asked this question. We found that about 1/4 of furries identify themselves as bronies. Brony haters groaned at this question. How do furries and bronies view bronies? So this is a scale of how much you like them on a scale of 0, don't let them in my house, I hate them, to 100. Oh, they're the most amazing thing in the world. I'm paraphrasing. So we asked furries and bronies to rate non-furries. They had about 50. They felt, they're okay. So furries and bronies rate non-furries, okay. Furries and bronies think pretty highly of furries. Bronies think highly of bronies. Furries are Now, it's important to note something about mathematics, specifically averages. If you have some people who think very highly of furries, and if you have some people who think very poorly of furries, you will end up with about middle ground. We find that about 1/3 of the fandom thinks quite highly of bronies. These are probably the bronies. About 1/3 of fandom feels quite negatively about bronies. And about 1/4 of the fandom is like, about bronies. I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask who is who. In terms of, do you consider bronies to be a part of the fandom? About 50% of furries say that yes, bronies are totally a part of the fandom. They're, just as much as any other group. And about 25% say, somewhat, there's some overlap, I kind of see it. About 20% of furries say, absolutely not. It's something completely different altogether. Get it out of my fandom. Maybe not that last part. Comparing bronies and furries. So recognizing that about 25% of furries self-identify as a brony, are there any differences between furries and bronies? There are some differences, and this first one is my favorite finding of the brony data. There's this idea that bronies have come into the fandom, bronies are these new furries who come into the fandom and wreck everything for the rest of furries. On average, bronies are people who have been furries for longer than the average furry. So they were here first. Bronies also tend to say that they were furries from a younger age than non-brony furries. Bronies are a little more feminine than furries are. And furries, not surprisingly, have a better opinion of, or bronies, not surprisingly, have a better opinion of bronies than do non-brony furries. Yes?
So by more feminine, did you have like a scale of how much they identify as one gender or another, or is that combining scales and like whether they...
We use the unidimensional construct in this case, going from masculine to feminine to keep it
Okay. simple.
There are probably better ways we could have done it, but we're constantly fighting with our survey lengths. So it was a simple question of how masculine or feminine do you feel. Reasons furries cite for disliking bronies. The most popular reason that they're obnoxious, they're excessive, or they force their culture on others. 50% say, oh, they're just not the same as furries. I don't like them for that. Just a general hatred for them. I hate them. Someone say, I don't hate all bronies, just specific ones. But 12% say, well, it's unimaginative. It's sort of a fad, or it's shallow, it's one-dimensional. You're not creating your own character, you're using someone else's character. And this is my favorite, about 11.5% say it's silly, it's dumb, or it's immature. Say the people who dress up in fuzzy animal costumes, or go on mucks as dragons, and it's silly and immature. Comparing furries and bronies, there are some differences here. Specifically that bronies tend to experience worse physical health. We're not sure about this one. The only thing I can think of, I mean, it's a small difference. We have a large sample here, so it's mean-wise, it's kind of a small difference, and we're thinking it might have, my hypothesis is that people who watch My Little Pony can be assumed to watch at least one television show, whereas furries, you can't make an assumption necessarily they watch a television show. So perhaps the difference is in how much television viewing they do. That's kind of a weak hypothesis. I'm still scratching my head to think about it. Bronies tend to have a slightly less formed sense of self. Not significant, very, very, very slight, statistically significant, but not a huge difference. They're more likely to experience greater bullying than furries are. Throughout their whole life, they say that they've experienced more bullying, but particularly between the ages of 19 and 24, which is about when My Little Pony came out for most of them. So ever since they became a brony, chances are they've experienced more bullying. Things that bronies and non-brony furries did not differ on. Age-wise, it's not the case that bronies are any younger or older than non-bronies. Bronies aren't any, it's not that they identify less with the furry fandom, they tend to be right on par in terms of how much they identify as a furry. They don't differ in terms of how much they feel human or not human. They rate the furry community just as highly as non-brony furries. In terms of how much their persona is connected to themselves, they rate their personas just as much a part of themselves as non-furries, or non-bronies. And in terms of biological sex, there are just as many, the same ratio occurs between males and females for bronies as does for non-brony furries. This is bigger. Sexual orientation, bronies are not any more gay or straight than the rest of the fandom. Relationship status, they are just as likely to be single or taken as the rest of the fandom. Education-wise, they have the same level of education, they have the same self-esteem. They're not more damaged than furries are. In terms of psychological well-being, I choose my words carefully. And they don't engage in fantasy any more than furries do. Furry culture. Anyone know who this is? Watonga. All right, yeah. So what got you into furry? Theians and otherkin, so again the Theians can hopefully back me up on this, were more likely than furries to say that it was something inside of me that sort of drew me to the furry fandom. Whereas furries are more likely to say it was something outside of me. It was a friend, it was a show, it was something outside of me that influenced me and sort of got me into the fandom. That said, many of them were just likely to say that it was both. It was some combination of these two things.
What do the asterisks denote?
The asterisks point out statistically significant differences. So this means that these two are statistically significantly different. The stats are rather inconsistent between these because this is taken from 3 or 4 different talks kind of smashed together. So, yes. What is the number one determinant of what made the most furries? What single influence caused the most furries?
Movies? Either Lion King or wrong. Oh, okay.
The internet is responsible for more furries than anything else.
Access, that's why.
Yep, that's exactly right. I thought Disney...
The statistics may be split since you have cartoons and Disney in separate things.
Possibly, that's a possibility. I thought Disney was going to be higher, given the number of people who said, Robin Hood or Lion King.
There's Bugs Bunny and whatnot, Tiny Toons, none of that's Disney.
That's true. That's true. Very good point on that one too. I hadn't thought about that.
They're a little more prevalent than Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah. Good points. Well played. I wish I could go back and rewrite this question now. But regardless, internet, most important influence. Once furries are into the furry fandom, what causes them to stay? What are the things that furries say are the most, drawing or compelling parts of the furry fandom that draw them into it? A sense of belongingness. I belong to a community of like-minded others is definitely one of the most strong draws to the fandom. Escapism. I don't think about my crappy life when I'm going to a furry convention or going in a muck or something like that. Entertainment. It's fun. Attention. We're split on this one. Some furries say very much. My hypothesis would be that these are the fursuiters, speaking as a fursuiter. You draw a lot of attention to yourself, and that's kind of fun. Others say, I don't want that attention at all. Get it away from me. That's like the furthest reason from the truth why I'm a furry. Sexual attraction. We're split on this one, too. Some furries vehemently deny that sex is a part of the fandom. Others say, I wouldn't be in the fandom without it. The point of this slide is to say that you can't make a claim one way or another. You can't say furry is all about sex or furry is entirely not about sex. Anyone trying to do that is going to sort of by definition ignore between 25 and 50% of the fandom to say one claim or another. It's a part of the fandom. It's certainly not the defining feature of the fandom, but it's not. You can't deny that it's a part of the fandom either. Components of the fandom. So we took a whole bunch of different things that people said were parts of the fandom, and we said, how much is this a part of the fandom? Things like arts, a sense of community, going to furry conventions, being a part of online groups of furries, a sense of accepting other people. These were defined as being features that were sort of key components of furry culture. Drama and sex were not. I really thought drama would be up there. Furries proved me wrong on that one. Things furries like, sort of like, and hate. Furries like science fiction, furries like video games and cartoons and webcomics and artwork. These are pretty universal things. A lot of furries like anime, they like mucks and role-playing, like tabletop gaming. Furries don't like sports. This is the only thing, pardon?
I said, and yet we have our own, Predator and Prey.
This was the list, and we thought, okay, they're going to bounce around with that. Sports was the only thing that was just consistently bottom of the list. And I know at least one British furry back up in Ontario who weeps at this finding. Popular websites and artists. I can almost guarantee that most of you could rifle these off. What's the most popular website? Yes. I will point out, in my not pointing out or making a statement either way, a significant number of these are used to obtain porn. Just saying. In terms of top artists,
Lodge?
I have a few more.
Because
Dark Natasha.
Lodge!
Dark Natasha.
Dark Natasha.
So,
Oh, really?
writers and artists. Are we all a community of writers? Are we all a community of creative artists? Somewhat. So for artists, we find this, we call it the 40-20-40 split. About 40% of furries say not at all. I'm one of these. I'm terrible at art. I will never be good at art. Not my thing. About 20% say, sort of, I'm not bad at it. And about 40% of our fandom says, yeah, I'm pretty good at it. I consider myself to be an artist. So we have a fandom that has a number of very talented artists, or people who think they're very talented at the very least. In terms of writers, we see something very similar. So about half of the fandom says, no, I'm not a writer. About 20% say, sort of. And about 30% say, yeah, I'm totally a good writer. So a number of furries consider themselves to be, relatively creative, in sort of one medium or another. Are there any artists in this room? Oh, goody. You will like these. I'm hoping this.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm one of the 20% that's kind of.
Okay. I'm hoping any artist who has ever done a commission will like these, or get a smile out of these. Tell me if I'm on the mark here. Furry entitlement. These are questions that we asked furries to agree with on a scale of 1 to 7, and this is sort of what percentage of them agree with this. Artists should make sure they are able to meet me in person or other fans at conventions. Okay, so fans kind of, yeah. Yes, the most popular is, they said at least somewhat, they somewhat expect their favorite artist to be there to meet them in person, in some respect or another. I think that artists are obligated to go above and beyond their expectation, or beyond expectations to fulfill their fans' requests. Even though many furries disagree with this, you still find, between 5 and 10% say, absolutely. If I email an artist, I expect them to email me back.
email the president, see if he emails her back.
This may depend on the artist, by the way, and the popularity of the artist. If it's your fursuit artist, you may hope that they have a question about it or something.
Might be a poor question because they could be emailing to try to get a commission.
This is true. This is true.
You're trying to commission them, so you expect to hear back from them.
These are, I should point out, these are part of a scale. So we don't ask the question in isolation, we ask this along with a lot of other things that tend to hang together pretty well. So even though a person may, on any one item, there may be little idiosyncrasies, if they tend to agree with all of these, you get the sense that they're probably a pretty entitled individual.
Yeah.
If I email an artist, I expect them to email me back. The artists that I am a fan of should make special accommodations for me or other fans because we are devoted. Now, well, again, more than half of furries tend to disagree vehemently with this, but there's this scary. These are your commissions from hell. Artists, are you nodding? Maybe.
Yeah.
Artists should listen to their fans and take our suggestions. Take it for what it is. We're just reporting it. I would let an artist know if I thought their work was subpar or inadequate. 40% of the fandom considers themselves to be a good artist, so. I should get special treatment for my favorite artists. I'm thankful that this one is as low as possible.
Yeah.
But there's always someone. Interaction between furries and furry culture. About 35% of furries said they attend some local meets, so not conventions, but just weekly or monthly sort of local meets. 25% say they regularly attend, or they attend regular local meets. Myself personally, I attend a weekly or bi-weekly luncheon. We go out to dinner at various restaurants and such. 25% of furries have never attended a furry convention, and about 50% say they attend at least once a year. So there's sort of a divide. A lot of furries say that they go to at least a convention a year. A good chunk of them say, I've never gone to one. It's just not part of what furry is to me. They're quite happy to look on the internet or communicate with each other online. 80% of furries use online furry forums. This is a very, very popular method of interacting with another furry.
They should be higher.
Possibly.
They should be higher.
I mean, there are other ways besides online furry forums. For example, like IM programs or things like Second Life or IMVU. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, IMVU or IMVU.
I know of no consensus on that pronunciation
Okay.
of that.
So I've never used it, so I have no idea. But the important thing to take away from this is that the furry community is a largely online community. We tend to interact with one another primarily online. Even though we interact with each other at conventions, the primary way that you probably know other furries is through your interaction with them on forums, through chat programs, through Second Life, through other online means. Furry meta-perception. So furries thinking about being furry. The more furry you are, so the more you consider yourself to be a furry, the more acceptable you see it to be furry. This kind of makes sense. The more furry you are, the more you think non-furries hate furries. So the more you get into the fandom, the more, and it's kind of interesting, it suggests this sort of insulating yourself. The more you get into the fandom, the more you keep trying to distance yourself from the world around you because you think it hates you. The more furry you are, the worse you feel treated when others learn that you were furry. So the more furry you are, the more you think that when someone learns about me, they're gonna treat me like crap. So, furries feel stigmatized by the world around them in general. They tend to feel that the world around them doesn't think too favorably of them. But they think that other stigmatized groups sort of feel their plight. They think, well, the average person doesn't like us very much. But anime fans kind of sympathize with us, or Twilight fans kind of sympathize with us. Zing. And furries feeling distinct from anime fans, the more furry you feel, the more vehement you are that furry is something different from anime culture or other similarly related cultures. Psychology makes a lot of interesting predictions about this. I'd have to talk to you about them afterwards. But for now, this is something that psychology would predict. Species and personas. If anyone saw the National Geographic episode, this is my buddy Alkane. He is part plant. What is the most popular species in the fandom?
I know. Canine. Wolves. Canine. Some sort of canine.
Hybrids? But if you don't count hybrids, hybrids kind of a cop-out answer. If you don't count hybrids, wolves. For those who can't read, it's wolf, fox, dog, big cat, dragon, mythical, cat, other, rodents, rabbit, raccoon, reptile, otter, avian, bear, horse, aquatic in general, hyena, skunk, marsupial, dinosaur, deer, feline, nondescript feline, squirrel, ferret, canine, insect. Before the room jumps on me for inconsistencies in this thing, I will point out that I had more than 4,500 species to go through and organize. I do not have a background in ecology or biology, so this is how I organized it.
Not on separating out canine from dog.
Because they said canine and they were nondescript. If they said dog or domestic dog or something, I put them under dog. If they said just canine, I couldn't make an.
You couldn't decide if it was dog or
yeah, so it became its own thing. Same thing with feline down here. Feline is different from big cat or little cat, or what I call it, just cat. Yeah. In terms of breaking down hybrids, the most popular hybrid was dog-wolf. That kind of makes sense. Fox-wolf, dragon-wolf, basically wolves in anything. And dragons in anything.
Tiger wolf.
Yeah.
Dog fox. Interesting.
Pop-Tart cat.
Dog, fox, wolf was up there. There were others way up there because there are hundreds of unique hybrids. I can't talk about the most interesting ones because if it's a unique one, I can't put it on here because it would identify the person. So, dog. Among dogs, the most popular dog was husky and German shepherd. Perhaps not surprising. A lot of people will just say generic dog, just dog. Big cats: tigers, lions, snow leopards, cheetahs, panthers, lynx, etc., etc., etc. Mythical creatures: Pokemon. Mythical meaning doesn't exist in this case.
Okay.
Dragons are not on this list because dragons kicked everyone else's asses. But Pokemon. Yes. In terms of other was a list of a whole bunch of things. A lot of people made up their own species. Or unknown, they said, I can't even begin to describe it to you. Cows, goats, bulls, lemurs, primates, etc., etc., etc. Put on lists. Going through this data, I had to have Wikipedia open in the other window. I maintain that some of these people only picked this because they saw how cute the picture was in Wikipedia. Oh, that's cute. Whatever that is, that's what I am. They're pretty cute.
What is non-specified versus unknown?
So non-specified was, they just said other. And other means it was some other species besides these ones,
Okay.
but I had to come together
Statistically
as...
too small to
Yeah, consider, yeah. Species perception. I like this data. I like all my data, but... So we asked furries, what do you think about, what do you think about other species, and what do you think about your species? You're a dragon. What do you think about dragons? And you're a cat. What do you think about cats? Regardless of what your species was, you tended on average to think that your favorite species was more masculine than the other species. It was also more feminine than other species. It was more sociable than other species. It was more fun than other species. It was more admirable than the other species, and it was less aggressive than the other species. So whatever your species was, it was pretty awesome and better than the other ones. So rest assured, what I'm telling you is that your species is the best one. Good job. And the average furry has had 2 to 3 personas, between 2 and 3 personas in their life.
Wow.
So the average furry has actually changed their persona at least once. Yeah.
Is that, well, what about if they have more than one persona?
That gets messy. That gets a little messy. We're still trying to figure out a good way to organize that. I think with 4,500 species, it becomes a mess. But this is what I can say conclusively right now, is that most furries have changed it at least once. There are a number of furries who haven't changed it at all, and some furries change it more frequently than their underwear.
It doesn't say much for furries.
It doesn't say much for their underwear.
Much more likely to choose predators.
In terms of predator or prey, whether you identify the species you identify with is a predator or a prey species, you find that you're more likely to identify your species as a predator species than a prey species. If you're Theian, you're especially more likely to do so. This kind of makes sense. If you identify with a species, it's better that it's a non-sucky one. It's an opinion. Sorry, I'm sorry for all the prey. I just put my foot in my mouth there. Sorry. I sincerely apologize for that. And a lot of people identify with a species that's both predator and prey. So depending on the context, it could be both predator or prey.
Omnivores.
Yeah, and many say that it's neither. I don't really, in the cartoony sort of fantasy world of furry, I never thought about it that way before. Why did you choose the species that you did? Therians are more likely to say for spiritual and identifying reasons. They're more likely to say because they like it as well, but the difference between them and furries on that is a little less significant. Does your persona matter? Does persona actually matter when you're interacting with furries? Furries typically say that, no, I wouldn't choose my friends based on what species they were. I wouldn't choose to hang out with someone based on their persona. Okay. But they do believe that the persona that someone picks tells you something about that person. And if you're Theian, you're especially likely to believe that what persona that person is tells you a lot about that person.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so furries feel that persona choice matters. Relationships and sexuality. Oh. One of my favorite figures. So I've been asked, is it true that furries are perhaps a tad more gay than the average person? Specifically heterosexual. The average population. Furries.
Actually, I'm surprised to see it's that high.
Yeah.
So I should elaborate a little more. Yeah. What you see here is from exclusively heterosexual to equal parts heterosexual, homosexual, to exclusively homosexual. So it's a type of Kinsey scale in a sense, yeah?
Break that down between male and female.
I will.
Oh, you did?
Oh! Anticipating your audience. I'll get to that.
Okay.
So what we find is that about 20-25% of the furry fandom is completely straight. About 10 to 15% are exclusively gay. 10 to 15 are sort of equal parts bisexual, and then sort of everything in between is sort of, it's a nice equal distribution of sort of in between. Now, for every heterosexual furry who says, "Damn it, I'm straight," you're still in the majority. You're still the biggest demographic. So. Wow.
Yeah.
Your persona. This is an interesting one. We asked, okay, first of all, we say, okay, out of persona, what's your sexual orientation? Now, what's your persona sexual orientation? So what you see here, blue is your persona sexual orientation, red is your sexual orientation outside of your persona. We find, if I don't blind myself, that your persona tends to be a little more bisexual than you are.
Yeah.
Especially if you are straight. So we have a number of thoughts about this. My thought about it, and sort of my hypothesis, is that for people who may be thinking about or dealing with issues of, am I gay, and sort of is this at a time in your life where you're still sort of figuring out who you are, perhaps having a gay persona is a way of sort of testing the waters. Is a way of sort of, putting your foot in the pool, seeing what it's like, seeing how people react to it, seeing is it me, does it actually, represent me, and maybe sort of a way of sort of trying it out. Possible. We'll see. We're hoping to test that in the future. Males and females. We find that the males in the fandom are more likely to be gay than the females in the fandom.
It's good for those straight males.
No, it's not. I'll jump to the punchline. If you're a male in the fandom, you're 3 times more likely to be single than females in the fandom.
Yeah?
Yes. Sorry, man. Everyone. I've just broken the spirit of half the males in this room. About 25% of the males in this room. On the plus side, if you're gay, it means there's a lot of,
Opportunity.
In terms of, so this slide was something I put together. I was asked a question by a fellow in Australia who was trying to put together some data about, do furries have more sex than non-furries? And so some of the media portrayals say furries are these crazy sex deviants who have all the sex. He was trying to use demographic data from a census to suggest that actually furries had less sex. Part of the problem with this was that they were looking at, who was the problem? I think it was mostly looking at heterosexual people and not looking at the way they could train the definitions. It wasn't looking at homosexual sexual orientation and homosexual sex. So what you find in terms of attraction to the opposite sex, non-furs are more attracted to the opposite sex than furs are. Non-furs engage in more physical intimacy with the opposite sex than furs do. And non-furs are more loving of the opposite sex than furs are. Which, if you look at just that, would say, yeah, furs tend to, engage in less sex and less relationships in general than furries do. When you take into account the data about homosexuality and the fact that so many furries are gay or bisexual, there's no difference. So you can't really say that furries engage in more or less sex than non-furries. Relationship status, I already broke the spirits on this one. Although it's interesting to point out, I'm missing it. I thought I had to, okay. The data's not on here, I goofed up, but what we find as well between furries and non-furries, furries are much more likely to engage in open relationships, polyamorous relationships, other non-traditional relationships. So, and yeah, in this case, males and females tend to differ a little bit as well. Males being a little more likely to have these non-traditional relationships. Furry psychology, I get to use my therapy cat picture. In terms of personality, so these are the questions that psychologists may be interested in. In terms of personality, the more a person reported being furry, so the more furry you were, the more extroverted you tended to be, the less agreeable you tend to be, and the more open to experience you tend to be.
Do you have a definition of agreeable?
Not disagreeable. Agreeable is things like you like to avoid fights, you tend to acquiesce to things, you tend to try and meet people halfway. Yeah, it was surprising to me as well. I don't know if I have a hypothesis about that. I won't bring it up now, but I'll mention it to you afterwards if you're interested.
You only have the aggressive ones to answer your questions.
Probably not. In terms of your persona's personality, so we asked about you, what's your personality like? And then we asked about your persona's personality. The general trend seems to be that across these, here's the established norms, here's the average person. and here is furries before their persona. And you see that there are some differences between these in the direction I was talking about. What's interesting is when you look at the personas and your personas ratings, on average, not for all of these, but for many of these, your persona actually brings you more closer to the established norm. So your persona may have this sort of normalizing effect on your personality. Your persona, being in your persona, may make you a little more normal, which is not what you'd expect if you dress up as a blue fuzzy cat or a... Again, it's not for all personality traits, but for several of these, it has this normalizing effect. In terms of fantasy, which is sort of my area of specialty and what I study, we tend to find that the more you engage in the furry fandom, the greater magical thinking you engage in. So you tend to engage in more magical thinking in general. In childhood and currently, you engage in more fantasy thinking. You tend to be better at perspective taking and empathy as a result. If you're better able to imagine what it'd be like to be in the other person's shoes, you're better able to empathize with them. And you tend to engage in more furry-related fantasy activities. Not surprising. For anyone who says that psychology is not a science or does not involve critical thinking or model building, this is what the theory that I showed you kind of looks like. So this is the statistical model right here. I like showing it off because it's taking way too long to build.
5-factor slope?
Pardon me?
Is that 5-factor slope there?
You mean at the top there?
Yeah.
Those are just a bunch of different measures of well-being, and this is a structural equation model. I'll talk about it later if you want. Functional and pathological fantasy, which is sort of, again, my area of specialty. I've sort of taken to study in fantasy and looking at sort of the healthy type of fantasy, so fantasy like I engage in fantasy to increase my creativity or to meet friends or to just have fun. Pathological fantasy is more so things like my life sucks, so I don't want to think about it. Or I'm addicted to this, or I'd be nothing if I didn't have this. So pathological. And we find that the more you engage in the furry fandom, the more functional fantasy you engage in, but but it's not related to pathological fantasy statistically. We also find that this functional fantasy tends to predict things like psychological well-being, a healthier sense of who you are, greater global citizenship, more liberalism, whereas pathological fantasy tends to be associated with less healthy relationships, less self-esteem, and a less solid sense of identity. Bullying also tends to predict greater fantasy in general. We're still looking into our bullying data right now. But elaborating on it a little bit, compared to non-furries, furries tend to be bullied more as kids, both physically and in terms of teasing. This was statistically significant even after controlling for the effects that may happen, age differences, or whether or not you're male or female, or sexual orientation. So even if a person was gay, controlling for that, as a furry, you still experience more bullying than the average person did. And interestingly enough, this happened the most during the identity formation period of 11 to 18 years, when you're starting to figure out who you are as a person. And these are right around the times when most people started to report that they identified as a furry. Specifically comparing furry to non-furries, about 50% of furries said that between the ages of 4 and 10 they were bullied, compared to only 37% of non-furries. And down the board you see that furries in general, up until about the age of 25, tend to report that they experience more bullying than do non-furries. So the question of whether or not bullying somehow contributes to you becoming a furry or identifying as a furry or finding solace in the furry fandom is questionable based on this. It leads to some interesting hypotheses. Yes?
I might have missed this part. Where did you get your non-furry sample from? And is it proportionally the same as your furry sample and otherwise?
In this case, our non-furry sample was based on, so what we've done in the past is when we go to Anthropomorphic, we'll ask 1,000 furries and we'll find 100 people who happen to be wandering around, people who are security guards or parents of furries or that sort of thing. That's not a very good control group because chances are they have a pretty positive attitude towards furries and they probably identify at least somewhat with furries. What we did as a result of that is we, over the summer, we put together a sample group, or we did a control study where we looked at 800 members of the general American population using an online study. These people were from the age of 18 to 65. They were half male, half female, from all walks of life, from all walks of education, conservative, liberal. So we can now sort of hone in on specific demographics. We can hone in on different parts of the population, sort of compare that. That was the control group that we used here. And the other half of your question was?
Are they proportionally the same? Like there are 400 people that are making up that 100%?
Not quite. So there, I mean, for the specific demographic, there's still a lot more furries. But I don't think they would account for the differences in statistical significance here that we're finding. So, does that answer your question? People have made the, I get asked this a lot, are furries dysfunctional people? We kind of joke and say, oh, you're here to study how broken furries are. So we tested, are furries broken? And in terms of self-esteem, we found that there was no significant difference between furries and non-furries. In terms of life satisfaction, we found that there was no significant difference between furries and non-furries. In terms of the amounts of anxiety you experience in your life, we found that there was no difference between furries and non-furries. Being a furry had no effect on your self-esteem, on your psychological well-being, on the happiness of your relationships. One thing it did, interestingly predict, was that if you were a furry, you were more likely to have a more solidified, developed sense of identity of who you were. So my sort of finishing point for this talk is that a lot of things make furries unique. We're a really unique culture. We have a lot of unique contents in our fandom, a lot of unique memes. So a lot of things define who we are as a culture, but I don't believe that psychological dysfunction is one of them. I don't think we should accept this idea that we're broken people and that this is what makes us who we are. So thank you, and questions or stories or whatever you want to do for the next half hour. Yeah. Chirp, chirp, chirp. Yeah. Oh, yeah, front.
Okay, this is probably the most asked question you've had. What is the most awkward and/or humorous moment you have had during this study? Over the years you have been conducting this, either in the field or in the background.
I don't know if you want to tell this story.
Okay, well, you can.
Well, just it was weird. It was feedback.
You tell this one while I think of whether or not I actually want to tell this story or not.
Well, it's not really funny or humorous. It was just bizarre. Because we'd put in the paper for the British Journal of Social Psychology, and one of the reasons that we got rejected from this publication, one of, had to do with the topic.
There were a lot.
Yeah, it was a big ass whooping is what that. They said, well, you stated, what was it, how many, 50-something% argued they were marginalized? Well, they said, well, that means that 50% of furries, or less than 50% of furries don't think they're marginalized, so they're not.